Have you ever been gifted a perfectly intact rabbit carefully placed on your front porch by a wild bobcat? Claire Donovan has. That morning, deep in a snow-covered Wyoming forest, she stepped out onto the porch and saw the gift lying quietly on the wooden floorboards. It wasn't torn apart. It wasn't random. It felt like a silent thank you sent from a soul she once saved and who never forgot her. She knew. Ash had come back, not to be helped, but to help, and that was only the beginning of a bond that crossed the boundary between human and wild. This is a story of compassion, nature's redemption, and a wild cat who became the silent guardian of the deep woods. Faint morning light filtered through the frost-laden pine branches, casting a grayish-white hue over the Bridger-Teton mountain range of Wyoming. Snow fell silently, like the dust of time settling on the roof of an old cabin nestled in the heart of the wilderness. There were no human voices in this space, only the sighs of the wind and the lonely heartbeats echoing from within the cold wooden house. Claire Donovan sat motionless by the large window, her hands wrapped around a warm ceramic mug as if holding on to the last breath of a once brilliant world. At 50 years old, once a well-known veterinarian in Colorado, she now lived alone. No husband, no children, no dog. Only herself, some old jazz records, and a forest she still didn't fully understand. Her husband, Daniel, had died in a car accident the previous autumn. 22 years of marriage swept away like the last breeze of the season. A few months later, Milo, the Bernese mountain dog who used to rest at her feet every morning, also passed away from pneumonia during the first freeze. What Claire had left was emptiness and the endless silence that stretched across her soul. This cabin used to be a weekend retreat for the couple, a place where the three, Claire, Danielle, and Milo, would sit by the campfire and tell stories under the stars. Now it was her hiding place from everything. A pinewood house with cracked walls, a creaky fireplace, and a forest that stretched all the way to the snow-covered ranges in the far distance. That morning, as she stepped out to gather more firewood, she heard a strange sound. A cry, low, long, as if choked in the throat. It wasn't the sound of a breaking branch, nor wind, nor small animals. It carried pain. Claire froze on the porch step. The wind whipped through her graying dark hair, tossing snowflakes into her face. She listened. The cry echoed again, further this time, as if coming from deep within the forest. She threw on a heavier coat, tucked a small knife into her belt, grabbed a flashlight and an old first aid kit, a habit from her days working at the Wildlife Rescue Center. Snow crunched beneath each step, crisp and sharp. Claire pushed deeper into the woods, where the towering pines stood like silent giants guarding the secrets of the earth. Then she saw it. Beneath a leaning tree where snow had piled into a small drift, a bobcat lay curled up. Its fur was stained with blood. One hind leg trembled, buried deep in the snow, caught on something, metal glinting red beneath the wound. Claire's heart clenched. A bullet. A hunting rifle wound, no doubt, and with that much blood, it wouldn't survive the night. Claire knelt a few meters away from the creature. The cold pierced her thick coat like needles, but she didn't care. Her eyes met the bobcat's. Golden, deep, not just pain, but something else, like sorrow, a plea, or perhaps a final act of trust. "Well, where did you come from, huh?" Claire whispered, her voice soft as wool. She gently removed her scarf and stepped closer. The bobcat growled low, hissing through its teeth, but didn't struggle. It trembled, but its eyes never left hers. "It's okay. I've seen worse than this," she said with a faint, bitter smile. "I'm a vet, and I'm not leaving you here." With the steady calm of someone who had once treated a snow leopard caught in a steel trap, Claire carefully pressed her knee over the animal's shoulder while her free hand examined the wound. The bullet had lodged into the right rear knee joint, tearing skin and bleeding steadily. She had to bring it back. Out here, in -10 degrees, nothing survived for long. Wrapped in a down blanket stuffed into a large backpack, Claire carried the bobcat through the snowy trail. It didn't fight or scream. It only breathed, shallow, fast, but quiet, as if it knew she was its last hope. Once inside the cabin, Claire placed the bobcat on her old work desk, pulling out every light, disinfectant, needle, thread, and surgical tool from a worn-out cabinet. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but because her heart had started beating again for the first time in months. "We're going to fight this. You and me." In the cold kitchen, a dim yellow fluorescent light spilled across the wooden table where the bobcat lay. Its eyes were barely open, clouded from blood loss. Its chest rose and fell, wheezing like breath dragged through a sheet of ice. Claire Donovan stood beside it, gloved hands, an old, stained medical coat on her shoulders. Before her was an improvised surgery. No modern equipment, no assistant. Just a woman, a wild animal, and a bullet buried deep in flesh. She lit the fire and sterilized the old surgical knife with alcohol. The faint crackling echoed through the still room like the beat of a heart. Her hands didn't tremble. Not now. She had once saved a lion cub with a torn belly during a volunteer trip in Kenya. A bobcat, though wild, was still just a life in need of saving. "All right, little one. Hold on now," Claire whispered, her hand gently resting on the animal's neck as if to reassure it. A small dose of veterinary ketamine had begun to sedate the bobcat. As its eyes slowly closed, it didn't snarl, didn't resist. She felt something, a fragile, quiet thread, yet unmistakably real, the trust it gave her. The blade sliced lightly into the blood-soaked fur. New blood surged forth, dark crimson. Claire clenched her teeth and reached deep into the wound with tweezers, searching. Contact. The sound of metal against metal, ting, rang out like an echo in the mountains. She gasped and pulled out a small mushroom-shaped bullet with a flattened tip, a hunter's air rifle round. No signs of severe infection. She rinsed, disinfected, and stitched, one suture at a time, carefully, silently, focusing as if she were sewing her own heart back together, the shattered piece she'd been hiding ever since Daniel passed. The surgery ended near midnight. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Large flakes, soft as feathers, drifted in the wind, brushing against the window pane like silent white phantoms. The bobcat lay in a blanket nest near the fireplace. Claire sat in the armchair, eyes never leaving the sleeping creature. Firelight danced across its fur, ash gray, streaked with pale spots like embers after a fire. She watched it for a long time. The name came suddenly, as if sent from the cold night sky. "Ash," she whispered. "Ashes. Not of death, but what remains after fire has passed. Proof that life had once been and could rise again." In the days that followed, Claire's cabin became an improvised field clinic for Ash. Each morning she changed the bandages, checked the stitches and cleaned the wound with warm saline. Every night she placed a bowl of water nearby and a tray of shredded boiled chicken. Ash never ate it right away, but a few hours later, the tray would be empty. Claire tried to maintain distance, just as her professional instinct told her to. A bobcat is a wild animal. Once it recovered, she knew she'd have to let it go, but it was hard. Especially each morning when she found Ash watching her from the corner by the fireplace. Not snarling, not growling, just watching, silently, calmly. Just like Daniel used to look at her after long, exhausting surgeries. No words, just a look, and she would understand that someone saw her, trusted her, was there for her. One afternoon in mid-January, as the sky turned a shade of dull gray, Claire was reading when she heard a soft sound behind her. Turning around, she saw Ash hobbling on 3 legs, the injured one still curled, not yet touching the ground, walking toward the glass door. It sat there, watching the snow fall outside. Claire approached and gently cracked the door open. A rush of freezing air swept in. Ash took a long breath, closing its eyes as if savoring the scent of pine, of living resin. Then it turned to look at her, a look that made Claire freeze in place, as if it were asking, "Can I trust you again?" And so, on that bitterly cold night, 20 degrees below zero, Claire laid out another blanket nest just inside the back door, where Ash could lie and look out into the forest. No cage, no tether, just a fragile border between home and the wild. Ash slept in that corner. Its ears twitched now and then when the wind howled across the roof. Claire watched it. And for the first time since Daniel's death, she didn't feel like the last person left in the world. A week later, on one of the rare quiet mornings, Claire was making coffee when she heard a sound behind her. She turned. Ash was gone. The back door was ajar. Snow held the imprint of paw prints, a trail that started deep, then faded, and vanished into the woods. Claire stood still for a long time. The coffee in her hand grew cold. Her heart felt hollow. And then she exhaled. Ash was strong enough to leave, and the strangest part, she didn't feel pain. She wondered, was it because this time she hadn't lost anyone, but instead had given someone a second chance at life? Spring arrived slowly in the Bridger Teton Mountains. The snow melted into trickling streams that slipped through cracks in the rock, weaved through tree roots, joining the hushed whispers of the living earth. Claire Donovan sat on the porch, holding a mug of herbal tea, eyes following the fading traces of old paw prints on the soft mud. It had been 3 weeks since Ash left. The cabin was quiet again, like in the beginning, but no longer cold. Not quite. Claire didn't expect Ash to return, but that didn't stop her from hoping. And then, one early morning, hope became reality. That day, the fog was thick, like a veil laid over everything. Claire was gathering dry wood behind the cabin when she heard a sound. Very faint, but unmistakable. A breath, a step on the wooden floor. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. Ash. Taller than before, its gray coat fuller, its shoulders firm. But what took Claire's breath away wasn't the maturing frame. It was the streaks of blood staining its front leg and the patch of fur matted red at the neck. She rushed forward, but Ash stood still. No growl, no retreat. Its golden eyes remained the same, intelligent, calm, and this time carrying something different, like a messenger from another world, bringing a story still untold. "You're hurt," Claire whispered. But as she stepped closer, Ash backed away. A low growl, not out of fear, but as if to say, "It's okay, this isn't mine." Claire froze. She looked more closely. Yes, no scratches, no bite marks, no limp. This blood belonged to someone else. Ash sat down on the porch, licked its paw, gnawed at the dried blood, and then, almost as if finishing a task, stood up and disappeared into the forest as silently as it had come. From that day on, Ash began to return more frequently. Sometimes in the early morning, sometimes at midnight, each time in a different form, sometimes clean, sometimes blood-stained, and never once did Claire see it eat, even though she always left a tray of food by the door. It wasn't hunger that brought it back. It was something else. One evening in mid-April, the rain was light. Claire was washing dishes when she heard a knock on the back glass door. She opened it and went still. A red squirrel lay at the doorstep, still alive. Its leg was dislocated, eyes wide with fear, and beside it, like a shadow just slipping away from the scene, Ash. Claire managed to catch the squirrel with a thick towel, brought it inside. Soon after, she bandaged it, fed it, and kept it in a straw-lined box. It lived. When she returned, Ash was gone. Since then, the living things in need of saving began to appear. A robin with a broken wing. A rabbit was burned by an electric trap. A baby marten covered in spilled oil. Never once did Claire see Ash bring them directly, but its paw prints were always nearby, pressed into the wet earth or peeking behind the brush. Each time, Claire's heart tightened with a strange emotion. Admiration, gratitude, and pride. Once, Claire followed Ash's tracks out beyond the house, across a shallow stream, and there, among the dense pines, she found a metal trap, disabled, spread open on the ground, with small bloodstains around its jaws. No animal was caught inside, but on a nearby rock something made her breath catch. A tiny claw from a bobcat kitten. Claire dropped to the ground. Her eyes burned. The wind passed through her and she trembled. Not from cold. She realized Ash wasn't just a survivor. He was a sentinel, a guardian. In a forest full of snares and human shadows, a creature once nearly killed by mankind had returned to protect others from the same fate. And Claire, the one who had once saved him, was now entrusted with the next step, to heal, to care, to help them survive. Ash was the hand that delivered them. She was the one who caught them. Some nights, Claire stood at the porch, gazing deep into the dark. She saw nothing, but she knew, somewhere out there, Ash was watching. A tiny light flickering in the wilderness. Not a flashlight, not the moon, but a gaze, a trust. From the wild, offered to a human. Summer on the Bridger Teton Range did not arrive with harsh sunlight, but with gentle silence. The howling winds through the pines had ceased. The snow no longer covered the trails. In their place came the scent of young pine, the murmur of streams, and birds calling to one another in the pale morning light. Claire Donovan began each day with a new habit, watering the patch of wild grass by the porch, where Ash had once lain, licking his wounds for the first time. She no longer left food out. There was no need. Ash would come if he chose. And he had chosen. One early morning in July, while the mist still clung to the edges of the forest, Claire heard a very faint sound from the tree line Not rustling, not thudding, but a deliberate quiet. She stepped onto the porch. Her heart tightened, the same way it always did before surgery. And she saw him. Ash. Larger now, his fur gleamed in the morning sun. His golden eyes no longer just intelligent, but carried the presence of a leader. He sat still among the towering trees, like part of the forest itself. He didn't approach. He didn't flee. He just sat there, watching her. Claire stood still. She didn't call, didn't wave. She simply placed her hand over her chest, where her heart pounded stronger than it had in years. She smiled and nodded, a wordless greeting. And then Ash turned away, vanishing behind the leaves. But every few weeks after that, he would return, never stepping onto the porch, never touching Claire, only leaving signs. A faint paw print on damp earth, a tuft of fur caught on the wooden fence, or a gift. Not dead prey, like animals often offer their kind, or humans, but things that were different. A young pine sprig is still wet with dew, a flawless white feather, a deep crimson maple leaf in the middle of summer, green. Claire began collecting those offerings in a small wooden box, placed by the window, like someone keeping love letters from a past romance. Not to summon it back, but to remember something real once happened. One rainy night, Claire woke to the sound of gentle scratching at the door. She sprang up. The wind swept across the porch. The firelight still flickered inside. She stepped out, barefoot, eyes blurry. And on the wooden steps lay a tiny skunk, soaked, breathing weakly. Claire wrapped it gently in a towel, brought it inside. Her heart was pounding. Ash was nowhere in sight, but in her heart she knew. It's you again. Ash was no longer a wild animal in need of rescue, but he wasn't a creature in need of rescue anymore. He was a messenger, a traveler between two worlds, deep forest and cabin light, instinct and compassion, flesh and soul. Claire no longer asked questions. She didn't need to know how Ash survived, how he avoided traps. She simply accepted and trusted, just as Ash had once trusted her. Each time he returned, Claire no longer called his name. She simply nodded, simply looked, and in those eyes, without a single word, were 1,000 unspoken things. Autumn arrived. Leaves fell thick along the back trail. Claire cleaned out her old book stash and decided to host an outdoor children's reading circle, telling stories of forests, of animals, of life, but never mythologizing Ash. Number she told the truth, that there had been a bobcat that was once shot, that she had once saved him, and then he had roamed the woods saving other creatures, with no need for thanks, no need for medals. A wild cat, a friend, a quiet part of healing. 5 years passed like a long dream. Claire Donovan had now become a part of the Bridger Teton forest, not just because of her wooden cabin, her small garden, or the mobile library she brought to mountain children, but because of the story she carried. People called her the woman who lived with the soul of a bobcat. She didn't deny it, but she never added more. Because the truth, as she'd come to understand, didn't always need to be spoken, only safeguarded. Winter returned again. Snow piled thick on the porch. Frost fogged the windows. Claire, her hair now more silver than black, was finishing the final lines of her children's book manuscript, The Guardian in the Forest. No human names, no place names, just the forest, and a wild creature who knew how to give back, not with words, but with life and silence. That morning, Claire opened her window like she always did. But the first thing she saw wasn't the snow or the birds or the cold gray sky. It was a plump hair placed neatly on the porch step, untouched, not dragged, simply a gift. And Claire knew. Her heart pounded faster. She opened the door wide, eyes scanning the forest's edge. Nothing, but she felt it. A presence, very near, but asking for nothing, only wanting her to know it was still there. That afternoon, as pale golden sunlight filtered through the pines, Claire stepped out with her old rocking chair. She sat there, silent, and then, as if time paused for just a breath, Ash stepped out from the shadows, larger, majestic. His fur was silver gray like mountain mist, his gaze no longer just golden, but holding an entire silent sky. He didn't come close. He didn't pull away. He sat just a few meters away, far enough to remain wild, close enough to say thank you without words. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but no words felt right. Just one slipped out, soft as breath. Thank you for coming back. Ash didn't respond. He just sat there, eyes watching the sunset and her. Long moments passed. Then, as the sun dipped behind the Tetons, he stood, still never touched her. But before stepping into the woods, he did something he hadn't done once in 5 years. He turned back and looked deep into Claire's eyes, not with instinct or caution, but a final farewell. Claire sat there long after Ash disappeared. Night bled across the sky like ink on paper. The next morning, she stepped onto the porch. There was nothing. No paw prints, no shed fur, no familiar scent. Only an emptiness, peaceful and still. And on the old wooden table, where she often placed her tea, was a single silver feather, long and flawless, glistening with dew. It could not have blown there in the wind. It could not have arrived by accident. Claire gently placed her hand over the gift. Her heart went still, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Ash had given her not just the chance to save a life, but the chance to feel alive again. The following month, Claire's first book was published, The Guardian in the Forest. It didn't become a bestseller, but it spread softly, quietly, like the way Ash had once walked through her life, leaving behind small marks in the snow. Marks that, if you are still enough, patient enough, kind enough, you will see. Love is not always an embrace, a promise, or a constant presence. Sometimes, love is leaving and returning. It's not touching, but always being near. It's knowing when to let go and believing that if something sacred exists between two worlds, it won't vanish. It will come back, like ash, like hope, like one final gift.